The blow struck so swiftly, leaving no space for a defensive move. My spectacles were flung into the air, then disintegrated upon the polished floor of the grand ballroom, witnessed by 130 hushed attendees. A sting on my cheek paled in comparison to the ache that pierced my heart. Juliet, my daughter-in-law, had just delivered this insult on her wedding day because I wouldn't relinquish the keys to my residence. "This is the consequence of your self-centeredness," she shrieked, her voice echoing for all to hear. "A woman of your years does not require such extensive living quarters." The ensuing quiet was absolute. No one stirred to offer assistance as I knelt, my hands trembling, to gather the fragmented remains of my eyewear. Some onlookers averted their gaze, visibly uncomfortable. Others murmured amongst themselves, but not a single soul, absolutely no one, dared to stand up for the unfortunate mother-in-law who had just endured public degradation. My son, Ethan, remained rigidly still, his eyes fixed on the floor as if I were non-existent. "You are no longer welcome here," Juliet declared, smoothing the immaculate fabric of her bridal gown. "Ethan and I need our privacy as we embark on our new life together. Your apartment would be ideal for us while we search for something more substantial." Her words dripped with malice. For months I had tolerated her condescending remarks regarding my modest attire, my aged automobile, and my unpretentious lifestyle. However, this transgression had crossed a boundary that should have remained inviolate. I rose slowly, acutely aware of every scrutinizing gaze upon me, feeling like a target for sharp projectiles. Tears welled and streamed down my face, yet internally, a fundamental shift had occurred. That physical strike was merely the culmination of a prolonged ordeal. For years, I had maintained a low profile, living with a spirit of humility and prudence. I held secrets unknown to anyone, not even my own son. The events of the preceding months began to cascade through my mind as I made my way towards the exit. I recalled Juliet's initial arrival at my home 2 years prior. Her expression soured upon surveying my humble abode, my worn furnishings, and my compact kitchen. "Seriously, this is where Ethan's mother resides?" she had inquired of him, her voice audible enough for me to catch. From that moment forward, each subsequent visit felt like a silent torment. "Aurora, you ought to consider a more manageable residence," she had advised me 3 months ago during a family gathering. "At your age, maintaining such a large dwelling is impractical. Furthermore, Ethan and I are contemplating starting a family soon. We will require additional space." Her insincere smile deceived no one except my son, who seemed to lose all personal volition whenever she spoke, acting like a mere automaton. The instances of humiliation had escalated incrementally. Initially, it was commentary on my apparel. "Aurora, do you not possess anything more contemporary?" Then it was about my vehicle. "That car is so antiquated, it is perilous for you to operate it." Following that, it was my part-time employment at the local florist. I fail to comprehend why a woman of your age continues to work rather than embrace leisure. Each utterance was like a miniature poison dart aimed at my self-worth. "My name is Aurora Hughes. I am 68 years old, and throughout my life, I have cultivated an existence characterized by discretion rather than ostentation. I dedicate 3 days a week to my work at a small floral establishment. My mode of transport is a decade-old automobile. My wardrobe is assembled from discount retailers. To the external observer, and particularly to Juliet, I am simply a middle-class widow subsisting on a fixed income. However, this is precisely the persona I have meticulously crafted over several decades. What those individuals observing me with sympathetic glances did not comprehend was that my existence had been fundamentally different prior to my husband's passing. My husband, Robert, had not been the typical office professional that everyone perceived. We had deliberately chosen a life of moderation, opting to keep our substantial assets concealed, thereby safeguarding our family's privacy in a manner that I now recognized as prescient. As I departed the ballroom, the murmur of conversations followed me like a noxious miasma. "Poor dear, she appears so frail," Juliet's aunt whispered. "The bride is quite right. That woman can no longer manage her affairs," added Ethan's cousin. "She belongs in a senior living facility, not living alone." Another guest offered their opinion with feigned solicitude. Each syllable landed like corrosive acid on raw wounds. The cool air from the ballroom's climate control provided a stark contrast to the oppressive warmth constricting my chest. My hands quivered as I searched my worn black handbag for my mobile device. A purse I had carried for 5 years, not due to financial incapacity to acquire a new one, but because I had learned to prioritize utility over superficiality, a trait my daughter-in-law evidently lacked. I dialed a number etched into my memory, a number I had not accessed in over a year, having foolishly believed it would never be required. "Carlos, it's Aurora. I require your immediate presence at the Royal Oaks Ballroom. Yes, at this very moment. Bring the relevant documentation. It is time for them to confront the truth." My voice wavered, yet a newfound resolve underpinned it. "Are you entirely certain, Mrs. Hughes?" Carlos inquired, his tone professional yet tinged with concern. "Once this step is taken, there is no recourse." I cast one last glance back at the ballroom, where Juliet was visible, engaged in laughter with her companions, likely recounting how she had put her ineffective mother-in-law in her rightful place. Ethan stood by her side, his smile weak, betraying no hint of remorse for the spectacle he had just witnessed. "Absolutely certain," I affirmed. 30 minutes, Carlos, no more." I concluded the call and proceeded with resolute steps towards my vehicle. For the first time in years, I was prepared to shed the guise I had employed to protect my family. For the first time, they would encounter the genuine Aurora Hughes, and when that moment arrived, when reality collided with their meticulously constructed facades, they would comprehend the profound weight of regret. The parking area was tranquil, illuminated by street lamps casting elongated shadows between the vehicles. I settled into my age sedan, awaiting the predetermined 30 minutes that would irrevocably alter their lives. 30 minutes for them to realize they had committed the gravest error of their existence by humiliating the woman who had, in secret, provided for them far more than they could ever comprehend. As I waited in my car, recollections of how I arrived at this juncture began to surge through me like an unstoppable deluge. It all commenced precisely 2.5 years ago, when Ethan arrived at my residence with that familiar, nervous smile from his childhood. "Mum, I wish for you to meet someone truly special," he had announced. And there she was, Juliet, with her flawlessly coiffed hair, her designer attire, and that smile that never reached her eyes. From the outset, I sensed an inherent disquiet. The manner in which she surveyed my apartment, assessing each detail with thinly veiled contempt, conveyed her true intentions. "How charming," she had murmured, her gaze sweeping over my second-hand furniture and faded drapes. Her tone implied the antithesis. Ethan, utterly captivated by what he perceived as love, remained oblivious to the condescension in her voice. That initial dinner proved to be a silent catastrophe. Juliet consumed barely any of the meal I had lovingly prepared, claiming she was mindful of her physique. When I inquired about her family, she offered evasive responses, but not before probing into my financial standing with an alarming degree of curiosity. "And how do you manage on a widow's pension, Aurora? It must be challenging to subsist on such meagre funds," she had stated with fabricated concern. What Juliet failed to grasp was that I had been observing her as intently as she had been observing me. Over the subsequent months, I began to discern patterns that placed me on high alert. Each time they visited my apartment, she would make remarks about the outdated nature of everything, suggesting I deserved something superior in my twilight years. Yet, her eyes consistently gravitated towards the elements of true consequence: the prime location of the building, the panoramic vista from my balcony, the generous proportions of the rooms. One afternoon, while Ethan was in the lavatory, I overheard her speaking softly on her mobile device in my kitchen. "Yes, Mum, his mother's apartment is situated in a highly desirable locale. If I can persuade her to relocate to a more compact dwelling, we could reside here until we acquire our own property. She is so guileless she will likely even express gratitude for our assistance during the transition." Her words pierced me like a blade, yet I maintained my composure as she rejoined me in the living room, affectation of innocence intact. From that point onward, every interaction with Juliet devolved into a meticulously orchestrated performance on both our parts. She assumed the role of the solicitous daughter-in-law, concerned for her mother-in-law's welfare, while I feigned the part of the vulnerable elder requiring guidance. However, inwardly, I was accumulating intelligence, observing her maneuvers, comprehending her genuine motivations. It resembled a game of chess where both participants believed themselves to be victorious. The ensuing months witnessed a progressive intensification of her manipulative strategies. Initially, there were subtle suggestions. "Aurora, I have encountered some delightful residences for individuals of your age, offering comprehensive services and eliminating maintenance concerns." Subsequently, the pressure became more direct. "You cannot continue to reside alone at your age. It is fraught with peril. What if you were to fall and remain undiscovered for days?" Each argument was designed to engender a sense of incompetence and helplessness. Ethan, my own son, began to echo these same pronouncements like a conditioned automaton. "Mum, Juliet has a valid point. Perhaps it would be more advantageous for you to consider relocating to a more manageable dwelling." Witnessing his gradual transformation into that woman's pawn inflicted more pain than any direct insult. The son I had nurtured with such profound love and sacrifice now perceived me as an impediment to his happiness. The psychological campaign intensified following their announcement of their engagement. Visits became more frequent, but also more fraught with tension. Juliet had begun bringing along real estate publications and brochures for senior living communities. "I am merely exploring possibilities for you, Aurora," she would state, unfurling the materials across my coffee table as if engaged in a business negotiation. "I wish to ensure you experience the utmost quality of life." However, I had been conducting my own investigations. One afternoon, while they were out attending to wedding preparations, I resolved to contact an old acquaintance who worked in real estate. "Amelia, I require your assistance with an inquiry," I stated. "There is a couple exhibiting significant interest in my apartment, and I wish to ascertain their true financial standing." The findings sent a chill down my spine. Juliet and Ethan were profoundly indebted. The wedding they were orchestrating carried a cost exceeding $50,000, entirely financed through credit cards and personal loans. The apartment they rented was on the precipice of eviction due to arrears. The luxury vehicles they drove were subject to financing agreements they could not sustain. Their lifestyle was an elaborate charade built upon crushing debt. Everything began to fall into place. The haste to marry, the insistence that I relocate, the constant commentary on my financial precariousness. It was not love that had bound this couple together. It was an urgent necessity to resolve their financial predicaments. And my apartment, situated in one of the city's most exclusive districts, represented their lifeline. This revelation struck me with the force of a spiritual blow. My son, the boy I had raised with principles of integrity and diligent effort, had opted for the expedient route of manipulation and deception. He had allowed an ambitious woman to persuade him to view his own mother not as a cherished individual to be loved and respected, but as a resource to be exploited. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, their overtures grew more aggressive. Aura, you cannot continue to be so self-serving, Juliet had declared to me merely 3 days prior to the ceremony. Ethan and I have made considerable sacrifices for this union. The least you can do is assist us with accommodation. Her words no longer even attempted to mask their insincerity. It was a direct demand masquerading as a familial favor. That evening, I made a decision that would alter everything. I contacted Carlos, my financial advisor, and the only individual I had placed complete trust in since the demise of my husband, Robert. Carlos, I require your assistance in preparing certain documents. It is possible that I will soon need to disclose information I have safeguarded for years. His tone immediately turned grave. Mrs. Hughes, are you certain this is the opportune moment? He cautioned me with the wisdom born of more than a decade managing my affairs. Once this information is disseminated, you cannot retract it. The repercussions could be devastating to family relationships. However, my resolve was already firm. The family I had striven to shield with my silence had chosen to betray me. And now, seated in my car in the ballroom parking lot, awaiting Carlos's arrival with the documents that would irrevocably alter the course of events, I understood that the moment of truth had arrived. 25 more minutes, and Juliet, Ethan, and all those guests who had regarded me with pity would discover the true identity of Aurora Hughes. 25 more minutes, and their idyllic worlds, constructed on falsehoods and avarice, would crumble like fragile sandcastles. The evening breeze rustled the foliage surrounding the parking lot, creating an interplay of shadows beneath the artificial illumination. It possessed a curious poetic quality that on such a pleasant night, numerous illusions were poised for their permanent demise. 20 minutes had elapsed since my call to Carlos, and each second felt like an eternity. From my vantage point, I could observe the opulent golden lights of the ballroom, discern the strains of joyous music and laughter escaping through the open windows. It seemed surreal to contemplate that in mere moments, this celebratory occasion would devolve into a nightmare for its principal participants. I closed my eyes, allowing the most agonizing memories of the preceding months to wash over me. I needed to recall precisely why I had reached this irrevocable precipice. The most profound humiliation had occurred merely 2 weeks before the wedding, during what Juliet had termed an important family summit. She had arrived at my apartment, accompanied not only by Ethan, but also by her parents. A perfectly orchestrated ambush. Aurora, we wish to discuss your future. Juliet's mother, a formidable woman who regarded me with the disdain one might reserve for a bothersome insect, had commenced. We believe it is time for you to make responsible choices regarding your life, continued Juliet's father, a robust gentleman who had surveyed my residence with the discerning eye of an appraiser assessing a property. At your age, residing alone in such a capacious dwelling is not only superfluous, but also hazardous. What if you experience a medical emergency and remain unfound for days? Their pronouncements were rehearsed, far too polished to be spontaneous. Ethan remained silent throughout the exchange, offering occasional nods like a meticulously trained marionette. Observing him there, seated beside a family that treated me as an obstruction, was akin to witnessing the demise of the son I had raised. "Mom," he finally articulated, his voice possessing a timbre I no longer recognized. "They are correct. Juliet and I have been discussing this, and we believe it would be more beneficial for everyone if you were to relocate to accommodations more befitting your age." Befitting my age, I repeated, feeling a nascent surge of anger within me. And who presumes to dictate what is appropriate for me? You, Juliet's mother interjected, exchanging a knowing glance with her husband, as if my words confirmed a pre-existing consensus. Aurora, we comprehend that this may be challenging to accept, but you must consider what is most advantageous for Ethan and Juliet. What is most advantageous for them, I mused, beginning to grasp the full extent of the conspiracy that had been meticulously woven behind my back. And I presume my apartment would serve them perfectly to commence their married life, would it not? The palpable silence that followed my question provided all the affirmation I required. They had meticulously planned every facet of this conversation, every argument, every psychological tactic. Juliet then seized control, deploying her full arsenal of emotional manipulation. Aurora, it is not solely about the apartment, it pertains to your well-being. We have undertaken research and we have identified a remarkable senior living facility. It offers round-the-clock medical services, social engagements, and prepared meals. You could forge connections with individuals who understand your circumstances. Her affected smile induced nausea. What exactly do you believe I am experiencing, Juliet? I inquired, feigning bewilderment. She glanced at Ethan for support before responding. Well, solitude, financial apprehension, the dread of being unable to manage independently. These are common at your age, Aurora. You need not feel shame in requiring assistance. The sheer audacity of this 28-year-old woman dictating what constituted normalcy at my age rendered me momentarily speechless. But then I perceived something in her eyes that sent a shiver down my spine, an absolute conviction that she possessed an inherent right to my life, my home, my decisions. To her, I was no longer an individual with agency, but an obstacle to be removed with minimal resistance. We have analysed the figures, Juliet's father continued, extracting a pre-prepared folder. The cost of the residence would approximate $2,500 per month. Upon the sale of your apartment, you would possess sufficient funds to cover this for many years, with a surplus remaining to assist Ethan and Juliet with their initial marital expenditures. There it was, the unvarnished truth. It was not about my welfare or my security. It was about liquidating my assets to finance their unsustainable existence. And if I decline, I inquired, though I already anticipated the answer. Aurora, Ethan interjected, his voice sounding rehearsed, we hope it will not be necessary to resort to more drastic measures. The unspoken threat was unmistakably clear. Should I refuse to cooperate voluntarily, they would pursue legal avenues to have me declared incompetent. They had conducted their due diligence, they had formulated a plan, they had prepared the ground to seize all that was mine, by force if necessary. The son I had raised with such profound affection was seated there, permitting strangers to issue threats against his own mother. That night, after they departed in the face of my firm refusal, I wept for the first time in years, not from sorrow, but from the definitive demise of the illusions I had harbored about my family. I had contacted Carlos immediately. I require you to investigate something with utmost urgency, I had implored him, my voice choked with tears. I need to ascertain the precise financial standing of my son and his fiancée, every detail, debts, income, liabilities, everything. The findings of that investigation proved devastating. Ethan earned $45,000 annually as a sales manager, but carried over $80,000 in credit card debt. Juliet worked part-time as an image consultant, earning perhaps $4,000 a year, yet spent as if she possessed an executive's income. Collectively, they owed over $120,000, excluding the loans they had secured for the wedding. The apartment they rented for $2,000 per month was 3 months behind on payments. The vehicles they drove were financed with installments that consumed 60% of their combined income. Their primary credit card was maxed out, and they had begun utilizing cash advances to service other debts. They were in a state of financial freefall, and my apartment represented their solitary hope for salvation. However, there was an additional revelation in Carlos's report that shattered me completely. For the preceding 6 months, Ethan had been regularly contacting banks and insurance companies, inquiring about loans against his elderly mother's property. He had been investigating the legal procedures for obtaining financial power of attorney over senior citizens. My own son had been systematically planning my dispossession for months. The most distressing piece of information emerged at the conclusion of the report. According to a private investigator engaged by Carlos, Juliet had been confiding in her friends that she had made a significant sacrifice by becoming engaged to a man who was older and less attractive, solely because his mother possessed valuable real estate and no competing heirs. To her, marrying Ethan was not an act of love, it was a strategic investment in my estate. That revelation had been the final catalyst. For weeks, I had contemplated simply disclosing my true financial circumstances to them, believing that perhaps the sheer shock would prompt them to reconsider their conduct. After reviewing that report, it became clear to me that the situation wasn't about financial hardship or sheer desperation. It was driven by a cold, calculated avarice that had twisted my son into someone I no longer recognized. The days leading up to the wedding were an ordeal. Each phone call from Ethan felt like a relentless push to change my stance. Juliet's visits were filled with barbed remarks about my perceived obstinacy and selfishness. They had begun treating me as if I were a senile elder whose views were irrelevant. The evening before the ceremony, Ethan made his final plea. "Mum, tomorrow is the most significant day of my life. Please don't let your stubbornness spoil it. Juliet genuinely desires what's best for all of us." His words served as the ultimate confirmation. I had lost my son. The man about to embark on married life was no longer the child I had nurtured with immense love and sacrifice. Now, as I sat in my car, awaiting Carlos, I understood that everything had converged upon this unavoidable juncture. It wasn't about seeking retribution or acting cruelly. It was about restoring balance. It was about demonstrating the ramifications of their choices. It was about impressing upon them that certain boundaries should never have been breached. 15 more minutes and the world would be irrevocably altered. My hands trembled as I dialed the number for Joseph, my 70-year-old neighbor from the adjacent apartment. He had been a silent observer to all the recent, tense interactions. "Joseph, it's Aurora. I need to request a profoundly important favor," I managed, my voice quivering. "Could you possibly retrieve the brown file from the second drawer of my desk and bring it to me? Yes, immediately. It's urgent." Joseph had been a steadfast support, like a brother, since Robert's passing, and I knew I could rely on him without question. While I waited, I recalled a conversation with Joseph just a week prior. He had witnessed from his balcony Juliet arriving with a property appraiser, unannounced. "Aurora, that young woman brought a gentleman with a briefcase who was taking measurements of your residence from the exterior," he had told me, his voice laced with evident concern. "They departed in haste when they spotted me. I don't at all like the turn of events." Joseph had been the first to perceive the subtle shifts in Ethan's demeanor over recent months. "Your son doesn't offer greetings like he used to," he had observed. "He would linger and converse when visiting. Now he rushes in and out as if he's embarrassed by something." His words echoed what my intuition had already confirmed. I had lost my son long before the incident that night. The file I had requested from Joseph contained documents that none of my family had ever laid eyes upon. Bank certificates, property deeds, and investment statements that Robert and I had meticulously kept private for decades. These were papers that proved the seemingly modest widow, living on a limited pension, was in fact a woman possessing sufficient assets to profoundly impact lives with a singular decision. 10 minutes later, Joseph materialized in the parking area, the file in hand. "Ora, what's amiss? You appear quite distressed," he inquired as he handed me the documents. "It pertains to Ethan's wedding," I stated, briefly recounting the events in the ballroom. I watched as his expression hardened with each detail shared. "That woman is a viper," he declared. "I always suspected as much. Joseph, a gentleman named Carlos, will be arriving shortly. When you see him, please inform him I'm awaiting him here," I requested. "And Joseph, after tonight, many things will transform. I want you to know you've always been like family to me." His eyes welled with tears as he nodded. "You are family to me as well, Aurora. Do what you must." As Joseph departed for the building, I opened the file and began reviewing documents I hadn't consulted in months. The first revealed a bank statement detailing a balance of $5,400,000 in an investment account. The second was the deed to an office building situated downtown, generating monthly rental income of $50,000. The third was the title to a beachside property I had acquired as an investment a decade ago. Robert had possessed an exceptional talent for investments, transforming a modest import business into a discreet financial powerhouse. Together, we had elected to maintain a low profile to safeguard our privacy and familial security. "Visible wealth attracts complications," Robert often remarked. "Invisible wealth bestows power." I had never envisioned needing to wield that power against my own son. Each document within that folder represented years of diligent effort and astute decision-making. My employment at the flower shop, 3 days a week, wasn't a necessity due to financial need, but rather a preference for staying active and connected to my community. The aging vehicle I drove wasn't a consequence of financial limitations, but a testament to my understanding that excessive ostentation inevitably invites trouble. My apartment, the very property Juliet so desperately coveted, was in fact the least economically significant asset in my portfolio. I had purchased it not for its monetary value, but for the cherished memories it held. It was where Robert and I had spent our final years together, where we had envisioned our future, and where he had passed away in my arms after a valiant struggle with cancer. Yet there was something else within that file, something that would fundamentally alter the circumstances for Ethan and Juliet. For the past 3 years, since my son had begun experiencing financial difficulties, I had been discreetly covering many of his obligations. The credit card payments he attributed to a work bonus were in reality being paid from my funds. The preferential rent rate he had secured from his landlord represented monthly transfers from my account. Unbeknownst to Ethan, I had been financially supporting his imprudent lifestyle for years. The luxurious apartment he inhabited, the vehicle he drove, even some of the expenses for the wedding currently in progress, had been facilitated by my clandestine financial assistance. I had believed I was aiding my son through a challenging period, failing to realize I was inadvertently enabling his metamorphosis into someone unrecognizable. The banking records indicated monthly disbursements totaling $4,500 that had kept Ethan's precarious financial situation from completely collapsing. Funds he mistook for work bonuses or tax refunds were, in fact, his mother's earnest attempts to shield him from the repercussions of his own irresponsible choices. The irony was profound. While Juliet was publicly demeaning me as an economic encumbrance to their future union, I was, in essence, the sole reason they could even afford such a ceremony. While they were plotting to seize my apartment to resolve their financial woes, I had been quietly addressing those very issues for years. I closed the folder and cast another glance toward the ballroom. The lights still blazed, the music continued to play. The guests remained in celebration, but in under 5 minutes, Carlos would arrive with the concluding documentation I required. In under 5 minutes, the process of severing all the financial ties I had used to protect a son who had chosen to betray me would commence. This is not about vengeance, I reminded myself. This is about rectifying a wrong. This is about teaching them that actions carry consequences, that avarice has a cost, and that family is not a commodity to be bartered for financial convenience. I had endeavored to shield Ethan from reality for far too long, and that protection had ultimately corrupted him into someone I no longer recognized. Headlights from an approaching vehicle cut through the darkness, momentarily dazzling me with their white beam as they illuminated the parking lot. It was Carlos, precisely on time as always, arriving with the documents that would permanently change everything. I exited my car and walked toward him, feeling each step propelling me further from the Aurora I had been and closer to the woman I needed to become. "Mrs. Hughes," Carlos greeted, stepping out of his car, a legal brief tucked under his arm. "Are you absolutely certain about this? Once we proceed, there will be no turning back from what is about to occur." I looked one last time towards the ballroom, where my son and his new spouse were likely still reveling in their triumph over the insignificant elderly woman they had just humiliated. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life, Carlos. It is time for them to meet the genuine Aurora Hughes." Carlos opened his folder under the parking lot's illumination and began presenting the documents he had meticulously prepared with his characteristic efficiency. "Mrs. Hughes, here is the order for the immediate cessation of all bank transfers you have been issuing in Ethan Hughes's name," he stated, indicating the first document. "Additionally, here is the formal notice of termination for the lease agreement that you had discreetly guaranteed. The landlord will receive this notification by tomorrow morning." I accepted the papers with hands that trembled but were resolute. Each document represented a strand that I had painstakingly woven over the years to safeguard my son. And now I was systematically cutting those strands. "And the payment for the ballroom?" I inquired, though I already knew the answer. "Cancelled," Carlos confirmed. "The deposit you had guaranteed will be debited tonight. They will have until tomorrow to secure an alternative means of payment." The sheer magnitude of my impending actions washed over me like an icy wave. For 3 years I had been the invisible safety net that had kept Ethan and Juliet's lives afloat. The apartment they resided in, the vehicle he drove, even the wedding taking place at this very moment, all had been made possible by my covert financial support. And now, in a single evening, I was going to definitively withdraw that support. "Carlos, I want you to grasp something," I told him, signing each document with a resolve I hadn't felt in years. "This is not an act of cruelty or revenge. This is the sole avenue for them to comprehend the true value of things. For too long I shielded them from the consequences of their actions, and that protection corrupted them into individuals I no longer recognize." "I understand perfectly, Mrs. Hughes," Carlos responded, his voice imbued with genuine respect. "In my 30 years as a financial advisor, I have witnessed numerous families undone by greed and ingratitude. What you are undertaking requires a fortitude beyond the capacity of most individuals." His words provided the final surge of strength I needed to take the ultimate step. We walked together towards the ballroom entrance, and with each stride, I felt my heart accelerating. It wasn't trepidation I experienced. It was a peculiar blend of sorrow for what I had lost and anticipation for what I was about to reclaim. My dignity, my self-respect, my inherent right to be treated as a human being rather than a resource to be exploited. The music abruptly ceased as we entered the ballroom. 130 pairs of eyes turned towards us, and I could discern the bewilderment on the guests' faces. Some recognized Carlos immediately. After all, he had managed the financial affairs of several prominent families in the city for decades. His presence at social functions typically signified that something significant was about to unfold. Juliet was the first to react. "What are you doing here, Aurora?" she demanded from the center of the dance floor, where she had been posing for photographs with Ethan. "You already departed once. Wasn't that sufficient drama for one evening?" Her voice carried the characteristic arrogance I had grown accustomed to, yet I could detect a subtle tremor of nervousness that hadn't been present before. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carlos announced in a clear professional tone, "I apologize for interrupting this celebration, but I have urgent legal matters to discuss with Mr. Ethan Hughes and Mrs. Juliet Dawson." The ensuing silence was so profound one could hear the hum of the air conditioning. A few guests began to retrieve their mobile phones, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Ethan slowly approached, his face pallid, his eyes clouded with confusion. "What is happening here, Mum?" he inquired, his voice lacking the assuredness it had possessed when he had humiliated me mere moments prior. "Who is this gentleman, and why is he speaking of legal matters?" I observed his hands tremble slightly as he adjusted his tie, a nervous habit from his childhood. "Ethan," I stated, my voice firmer than it had sounded in months. "This is Carlos Jones, my financial and legal advisor. He has arrived to deliver some documents that I believe you will find quite illuminating." Carlos opened his folder and extracted the first document. "Mr. Ethan Hughes, you are hereby notified that the financial guarantee your mother had provided for your lease agreement has been immediately revoked. Your landlord will be informed by tomorrow morning, and you will have 30 days to secure a new guarantor or vacate the premises." All color drained from Ethan's face. "Financial guarantee," he murmured, looking at me with eyes that were beginning to register comprehension and dread. "Mum, what is he talking about?" But I could see from his expression that a part of him already understood. For years he had harbored suspicions that his financial good fortune wasn't entirely organic, yet he had chosen not to probe, as the answers might have proven uncomfortable. "Furthermore," Carlos continued relentlessly, "the monthly transfers of $4,500 that your mother had been making to your personal accounts have been permanently suspended. This encompasses payments for credit cards, vehicle insurance, and various other expenditures that you believed were being covered by other sources." Juliet let out a gasp that reverberated throughout the ballroom. "That's impossible!" she exclaimed, rushing towards us, her wedding gown trailing on the floor. "Ethan doesn't have a wealthy mother. Look at how she lives. Observe her attire, her vehicle. She is an elderly woman subsisting on a meager pension." Her hysteria was palpable, and several guests began to murmur amongst themselves with growing fascination. "Finally," Carlos declared, withdrawing the last document from his folder, "the guaranteed payment for this celebration has also been cancelled. The management of the ballroom will be within their rights to demand full payment before guests are permitted to depart this evening." His words descended upon the ballroom like a bombshell, and I could see some guests nervously beginning to edge towards the exits. The realization struck Ethan with the force of a hammer. "You," he uttered, his gaze fixed on me with eyes incapable of fully processing what he was hearing. "You have been doing this all along. You have been paying for everything." His voice cracked on the final word, and for a fleeting moment I saw the small boy he once was, vulnerable and bewildered. "For 3 years, Ethan," I affirmed, my voice sounding strangely tranquil after the emotional tempest I had endured. 3 years during which I believed I was assisting you through a difficult period. 3 years during which I was convinced you would eventually recover and evolve into the man I raised. 3 years during which I hoped you would remember the values I instilled in you. Juliet began pacing in agitated circles, clutching her head with increasing desperation. This cannot be happening. This cannot be real, she shrieked as the guests observed her with a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. You are a destitute elderly woman. You work in a flower shop. You drive a 10-year-old car. You cannot possess such wealth. Appearances can be deceiving, Juliet, I stated finally, feeling decades of careful pretense finally dissolve. For years, I chose to live modestly because my husband and I believed that visible wealth attracts trouble. It transpires we were correct. It's simply that the complications arose from the most unexpected quarter. The music had entirely ceased, and the sole sounds within the ballroom were the agitated breaths of the newlyweds and the escalating murmurs of the guests, who were beginning to comprehend they were witnessing something entirely unforeseen. Some were already recording with their mobile phones, instinctively understanding that this narrative would become an urban legend. "Mom," Ethan pleaded, his voice broken. "Please, there must be a way to rectify this. The wedding, the guests, everything." But I could see in his eyes that he was finally beginning to grasp the immensity of what he had lost. Not merely money or financial backing. He had lost his mother, the woman who had loved him unconditionally for 35 years. The only way to rectify this, Ethan, was not to have broken it in the first place, I replied. The silence in the ballroom became deafening. 130 guests held their breath, processing the revelation they had just absorbed. Juliet stood motionless for the first time that evening, her eyes darting between Carlos, the documents, and my face, as if searching for a flaw in the reality that was disintegrating around her. Ethan simply stared at me with an expression I will forever remember, a blend of shock, belated understanding, and absolute dismay. "Mrs. Hughes," Carlos announced, his voice projecting loudly enough for all to hear. "Would you prefer I proceed with reading the complete financial breakdown?" His question hung in the air like a sword poised over the heads of the newlyweds. I could observe several guests drawing nearer, captivated by the unfolding drama before them. "Please, Carlos," I responded with a serenity I hadn't known I possessed. "I believe everyone here deserves to know the unvarnished truth." Juliet attempted to interject with a desperate cry, but Carlos raised a hand and continued, with the precision of a surgeon performing a delicate operation. "Over the past 36 months, Carlos began, consulting his documents, Mrs. Aurora Hughes has transferred a cumulative sum of $162,000 to cover the living expenses of her son, Ethan Hughes, and his fiancée. This sum includes $48,000 for rental payments, $44,000 for credit card obligations, $18,000 for vehicular insurance, and $22,000 for miscellaneous expenditures." A collective murmur swept through the ballroom. Some guests exchanged looks of astonishment. Others produced calculators on their mobile phones to verify the figures. Juliet's mother, who had remained seated at the head table throughout the confrontation, slowly rose, her complexion completely ashen. "Furthermore," Carlos continued relentlessly, "Mrs. Hughes personally guaranteed the total cost of this celebration, encompassing the venue, catering, music, floral arrangements, and photography, for an amount totaling $53,000. Funds which, as previously indicated, are no longer available to cover these expenses." Juliet finally found her voice, but what emerged was more of a guttural wail than coherent words. "This is inconceivable. It is a fabrication. No one possessing such wealth would live like a pauper." She turned to the guests as if seeking support, but found only faces filled with fascination, and some clearly amused by her desperation. "My dear Juliet," I remarked with a calm that starkly contrasted with her hysteria, You have just received a most valuable lesson regarding the fallacy of judging individuals by their outward appearance. For years, I chose to live simply because my husband, Robert, and I placed a higher value on privacy than on ostentation. It proved to be an exceptionally prudent decision. Ethan finally reacted, approaching me with hesitant steps. Mum, please, there must be an explanation. There must be a way to resolve this. You cannot shatter my life in this manner. His voice broke on the final word, and for a fleeting instant I felt a pang of maternal sorrow that nearly caused me to falter. Shatter your life? I repeated, feeling the anger begin to resurface. I am shattering your life? Was it not your wife who struck me in the presence of 130 people? Was it not you who stood by silently while I was being humiliated? Was it not you who conspired to dispossess me of my home? The irrefutable truth of my words resonated throughout the ballroom like the peal of church bells. Several guests nodded in agreement, clearly recalling the incident that had precipitated this entire revelation. Some even possessed video recordings on their mobile phones of the slap Juliet had inflicted upon me, digital testament to the cruelty that had instigated this disclosure. But that was different, Ethan stammered, though his voice lacked conviction. We didn't know, we didn't understand. We believed you truly required assistance. His excuses sounded hollow even to himself, and I observed some guests exchanging looks of contempt. You did not know? I inquired, my voice rising for the first time that evening. You did not know you were orchestrating a family ambush to coerce me into relinquishing my home? You had no idea you'd brought a property assessor without my knowledge. You didn't realize you were secretly looking into legal avenues to deem me incapable if I didn't comply. With each pointed question, Ethan's posture visibly deflated. Carlos seized the opportunity, extracting another document from his briefcase. Mr. Hughes, I must also inform you that your mother has elected to revise her will. All possessions that were originally earmarked for your inheritance have been reallocated to charitable organizations focused on shielding elders from familial mistreatment. The weight of this announcement struck like a silent tremor. Juliet recoiled as if struck, stumbling backward. You can't possibly do that, she shrieked, her veneer of composure shattering completely. We're your family. Ethan is your only son. You can't disinherit him over some trivial disagreement. A trivial disagreement? I echoed, allowing the phrase to resonate in the charged atmosphere. Is that how you characterize a family scheme to pilfer an elderly woman's home? Is that how you justify striking your husband's mother on her own wedding day? My voice had become frigid, and I observed several attendees visibly wince. Juliet's father, who had remained conspicuously silent throughout the escalating confrontation, finally stepped forward, his face a mask of poorly concealed apprehension. Mrs. Hughes, I believe the day's emotions are affecting us all. Perhaps we could discuss this privately once things have settled. His tone conveyed the realization of a man who had backed the wrong contender. There is nothing to discuss in private, I responded with unwavering resolve. Everything I needed to articulate has been voiced here, in the presence of the very individuals who witnessed my humiliation. You chose to make this a public spectacle, and therefore my reply will be equally public. The guests' gazes shifted between us, akin to spectators at a tennis match, captivated by every exchange. Carlos closed his folder with a decisive snap that echoed through the grand ballroom. Mrs. Hughes, all the pertinent documents have been presented and elucidated. The legal ramifications will commence with immediate effect. He then turned his attention to Ethan and Juliet, his expression professional, yet tinged with a discernible satisfaction. I strongly advise you both to consult with your own legal and financial counsel at your earliest convenience. Juliet finally surrendered, collapsing into a nearby chair, her sobs unrestrained and reverberating through the hall. "Everything is ruined," she murmured through her tears. "Everything we envisioned, everything we strived for, it's all lost." Her wedding gown, once pristine, was now creased and marked by her tears. "No," I stated, approaching her for the first time since the incident. "What has been lost are the deceptions, the avarice, and the profound lack of regard. What has been lost is the delusion that one can treat others as mere objects without facing repercussions." I paused directly before her, compelling her to meet my gaze. "This is the consequence of mistaking benevolence for weakness." Ethan moved to his wife's side, placing a trembling hand on her shoulder. "Juliet, we must find a resolution. There has to be something we can do." Yet, even as he spoke, I could discern in his eyes that the moment had passed. Certain bonds, once severed, cannot be re-established. "There is a way to rectify this, Ethan," I said, looking him directly in the eyes for the first time in months without experiencing pain. "You can learn from this. You can evolve from this. You can become the individuals I had hoped you would be before avarice corrupted you." My voice softened momentarily, for despite everything, he remained my son. However, that growth will need to occur independently of my financial assistance, my residence, and my inheritance. You will have to navigate this path the hard way, as everyone else does. The ballroom remained in a state of absolute quietude, every attendee recognizing they were witnessing the definitive dissolution of a familial bond. Carlos and I proceeded towards the exit, leaving behind a ballroom filled with stunned guests and a newly married couple, whose seemingly perfect world had crumbled in under 30 minutes. As Carlos and I made our way towards the exit, the silence that followed us was broken by a voice I hadn't anticipated hearing. "Wait, Aurora!" It was Lucy, Ethan's younger sister, who had been seated at a distant table throughout the confrontation. She rushed towards us, tears streaming down her face, her expression one of sheer disbelief. "Aunt Aurora," Lucy said, her voice quivering. "I had no inkling of this. I genuinely swear Ethan never disclosed their intentions regarding you." Lucy had always held a special place in my heart, a teacher by profession, now 29 years old, who had maintained a close connection with me even after Ethan had distanced himself. Had I known of their planned actions against you, I would have intervened to prevent them. I halted and observed her, seeing in her eyes the same sincerity I had known since her childhood. "I know, Lucy," I replied gently, placing a hand on her cheek. "You have always been distinct. You have never viewed individuals as mere opportunities or resources to be exploited." Her tears flowed more freely as she nodded, clearly distraught by her brother's conduct. "But why did you never inform us about the financial matters?" Lucy inquired, her confusion genuine. "Why did you keep all of this concealed for so many years?" It was a question that warranted an honest response, particularly from someone who had consistently treated me with respect and sincere affection. "Because your Uncle Robert and I discovered long ago that wealth transforms individuals," I explained as some guests discreetly drew nearer to listen. "We have witnessed families fractured by inheritances, friendships dissolved over loans, and children who perceive their parents as mere financial resources. We made the decision to live modestly to safeguard the relationships that truly held significance." Lucy nodded slowly, beginning to grasp the wisdom behind my choices. "But Ethan, he was different once. When we were children, he would have stood up for anyone who wronged you. What became of him?" Her question encapsulated the sorrow of a sister who had observed her brother evolve into someone unrecognizable. "What became of him was Juliet," I replied with sadness, but without animosity. "What became of him was greed masquerading as affection, ambition devoid of principles, and in my attempt to shield him, I deprived him of the opportunity to learn vital lessons about accountability and consequences. My response rippled through the ballroom, where the guests remained engrossed in every utterance. Carlos had respectfully remained on the periphery during this exchange, but now he approached and murmured something in my ear. "Mrs. Hughes, the ballroom coordinator is approaching. It appears he has already become aware of the payment cancellation. Indeed, I could observe a robust gentleman in a suit making his way towards us, several documents in hand, and a decidedly serious expression. Mr. Martinez," the manager stated in a strained voice, "I have just received a highly unusual payment cancellation notice. The contract for this event is secured until tomorrow morning. Can you clarify what is transpiring here?" His arrival introduced a new layer of immediate urgency to the crisis I had just precipitated. "Mr. Martinez," I replied, recalling his name from discussions held when I discreetly arranged the wedding payment. "The financial guarantee I provided for this celebration has been rescinded due to extraordinary circumstances that have come to light this evening." I gestured towards Ethan and Juliet, who remained centered in the ballroom like statues of despair. "I understand," Martinez acknowledged, surveying the scene with the seasoned perspective of someone who had managed social functions for decades. "And who will be assuming responsibility for the payment now?" "The total outstanding balance amounts to $53,000, encompassing the venue, catering, entertainment, floral arrangements, and photography services." His voice was professional yet firm, making it clear that a resolution was required immediately. Ethan finally stirred, approaching us with hesitant steps. "Mr. Martinez, there must be some misunderstanding. My mother, she cannot simply cancel the payment like that. We are family, this can be resolved." His voice carried a desperation I had never before witnessed, the desperation of a man who had finally grasped the gravity of his predicament. "Young man," Martinez said with the practiced patience of a professional, "the financial guarantee was provided personally and privately by Mrs. Hughes. She possesses the legal right to withdraw that guarantee at any given moment. I now require someone to furnish an alternative form of payment forthwith, or I will be compelled to suspend the event." Juliet approached, unsteady, her wedding attire now thoroughly disheveled, and her makeup streaked with tears. "You can't do this," she yelled at Martinez. "It's our wedding day. You can't jeopardize our wedding day over financial difficulties." Her distress escalated. "Madam," Martinez retorted with increasing sternness, "I am not jeopardizing anything. I am merely adhering to the contractual stipulations you both signed. If you are unable to provide an alternative payment immediately, I will have no choice but to request all guests to depart and suspend all services." His ultimatum descended upon the ballroom like a final decree. The stark reality of the situation began to dawn on the assembled guests. Some had already started gathering their belongings and discreetly heading for the exits. Others remained transfixed by the unfolding drama, like spectators at an unavoidable accident. "Mother," Ethan pleaded, approaching me with tears welling in his eyes for the first time since his childhood. "Please, I understand that what we did was wrong. I know we hurt you, but there are 130 people here. There are photographs. There are memories. You cannot demolish all of this over a dispute." His voice cracked on the last word, and for a fleeting moment I glimpsed the little boy he once was. "Ethan," I replied, with a calmness that surprised even myself, "I am not destroying anything. You are the one who destroyed this when you chose avarice over affection, when you opted for manipulation over sincerity, when you chose to humiliate me publicly instead of affording me the respect I deserve as your mother." Each word was like a precise incision, but they were words that needed to be spoken. "But what are we going to do?" Juliet inquired with a desperate tone, glancing at the guests who were progressively vacating the ballroom. How will we explain this? How will we settle all of this? Her panic was palpable, and I could see she was finally comprehending the true implications of her actions. You are going to do what all responsible individuals do, I responded. You are going to find means to earn money honestly. You are going to learn to live within your means. You are going to discover what it entails to labor diligently for the things you desire, rather than anticipating others to provide them for you. My voice had gained strength, and I could feel decades of accumulated wisdom flowing through my words. Carlos approached discreetly and murmured, "Mrs. Hughes, the legal proceedings have concluded. All documents have been disseminated and explained. There is nothing further we can accomplish here." His message was unequivocal. It was time to depart, to allow Ethan and Juliet to confront the consequences of their choices without my presence as a distraction. Lucy approached once more and embraced me tightly. "Aunt Aurora, I want you to know that you will always have my respect and my affection, regardless of what transpires with Ethan." Her words were like a balm to my wounded spirit, reminding me that not all family had been corrupted by greed. "And you will always have mine, Lucy," I replied, returning the embrace. "Remember this evening when you face significant decisions in your life. Remember that character is defined not by what we possess, but by how we treat the people we cherish." Her tears soaked my shoulder as she nodded, fully comprehending the lesson unfolding before her eyes. Martinez approached again, this time with greater urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, I require an immediate resolution. I have other engagements this evening and cannot retain staff here indefinitely without a payment guarantee." His professional patience was finally wearing thin, adding further pressure to an already dire situation. "You have my telephone number," I said to Ethan and Juliet for the final time. "When you are prepared to engage in a genuine dialogue concerning respect, principles, and responsibility, when you have acquired an understanding of what it means to earn your own way, when you can meet my gaze and offer a sincere apology for your actions towards me this evening, then we can converse. But for that to occur," I added, looking at them directly, "you will first have to devise a method to resolve the predicament you have created here entirely on your own." With those pronouncements, I turned and proceeded towards the exit with Carlos, leaving behind a ballroom fraught with disarray, despair, and the stark reality of deserved consequences. 3 days subsequent to the wedding, my residence had transformed into a sanctuary of peace I hadn't experienced in years. Joseph had visited each morning, bringing coffee and pastries from the neighborhood bakery, ensuring I was well following what he termed the night Aurora reclaimed her dignity. His visits had been a profound comfort, reminding me that I still possessed a chosen family who valued me for precisely who I am. The telephone had rung incessantly for these past 3 days. Ethan had called 37 times, leaving messages that progressed from initial anger to desperate pleas. Juliet had sent 14 text messages, each more frantic than the last. Her parents had appeared at my doorstep twice, demanding that I rectify the situation I had instigated, but I had held my ground with a composure that surprised even myself. Carlos arrived that morning with news that, while anticipated, was devastating in its full scope. "Mrs. Hughes," he informed me as we sipped tea on my balcony, "I have received comprehensive reports. Ethan and Juliet were evicted from their residence yesterday morning. The ballroom has initiated legal proceedings to recover the $53,000 owed. Their credit cards have been deactivated due to non-payment." "And where are they residing now?" I inquired, though a part of me already surmised the answer. "With Juliet's parents," Carlos responded. "Apparently it's a 2-bedroom apartment where 3 individuals already reside. The atmosphere is strained, according to my sources." His expression suggested that strained was a rather understated description of the reality. That afternoon, while tending to my plants on the balcony, I observed a familiar vehicle park in front of the building. It was Lucy, but this time she was not alone. With her was Amelia, an old friend from my real estate endeavours. And to my astonishment, Joseph emerged from the rear seat. "Aura!" Lucy called out from the sidewalk. "We need to speak with you. There are matters you need to be apprised of." Upon reaching my apartment, their faces displayed a mixture of urgency and concern that immediately put me on guard. "Aurora," Lucy began, "I've been looking into certain things since the wedding night, matters that I believe you must know before it's too late." She settled onto my sofa, a folder in her hands that appeared as official as the one Carlos had carried to the ballroom. "Too late for what?" I asked, pouring her some tea while attempting to maintain my composure. Amelia cleared her throat and spoke for the first time. "Aurora, over the past 3 days, I've been delving into Ethan and Juliet's financial situation. What I've uncovered surpasses anything any of us could have imagined. They had been meticulously planning this for over a year," Amelia continued, opening the folder to reveal documents that caused a sickening feeling in my stomach. "I found evidence that Juliet had been consulting with attorneys specializing in cases of mental competency for seniors. They had a detailed strategy to legally declare you incapacitated and assume control of all your assets." Joseph, who had remained silent until this point, leaned forward, his expression grave. "Aurora, there's more. That evening, after you departed the ballroom, I overheard Juliet speaking on the telephone with someone. She was remarking that the old woman had ruined everything, but they still had Plan B." His words sent a shiver down my spine. "Plan B?" I repeated, my stomach clenching with a mixture of apprehension and indignation. Lucy took my hand and gently squeezed it. "Aunt Aurora, they've been informing everyone that you've become senile, that the scene at the wedding was proof you've lost touch with reality. They are constructing a case for a judge to rule that you are incapable of managing your own affairs." The enormity of their betrayal unfurled before me like an infected wound. It wasn't sufficient to have publicly shamed me, to have plotted to seize my home, to have conspired against me for months. Now, they were attempting to leverage my justified response to their cruelty as evidence of mental incapacity. It was a level of wickedness that surpassed anything I could have conceived. "But that's not all," Amelia added, her voice trembling. "I've discovered that Juliet has been disseminating rumors in the neighborhood concerning your erratic conduct. She has visited several of your neighbors, suggesting they report any concerning observations they might have about you. The systematic nature of her defamation campaign left me breathless." Carlos, who had returned for our scheduled consultation, entered the apartment at that precise moment, finding the atmosphere thick with tension. "Mrs. Hughes, I perceive you are already apprised of some of the recent machinations." His expression was more somber than I had ever witnessed. "I have some supplementary news that corroborates your friend's findings. Ethan filed a preliminary petition yesterday," Carlos stated, withdrawing documents from his own file. "He is requesting a court assessment of your mental competency, citing what he terms irrational behavior and erratic financial decisions. He has submitted sworn affidavits from several witnesses present at the wedding." "Sworn affidavits?" I asked, feeling anger begin to supplant shock. "What manner of statements?" Carlos consulted his papers before responding. "Statements describing your unwarranted emotional outburst against an innocent young couple. Statements characterizing your financial decisions as vindictive and destructive. Statements suggesting that you have lost the capacity for rational judgment." Lucy squeezed my hand more firmly. "Aunt Aurora, they have persuaded several wedding guests to sign declarations. Most of them do not truly comprehend what transpired that evening. They simply witnessed an elderly woman attacking newlyweds." Her voice conveyed all the frustration of someone who had grasped the truth but felt powerless to ensure its triumph. But we have positive developments as well, Joseph interjected with a smile that starkly contrasted with the gravity of the situation. It transpires that there are more individuals on your side than they imagine. He retrieved his own mobile device and displayed a screen that left me astonished. Joseph, what is this? I inquired, looking at what appeared to be a social media video with thousands of views. Aurora, remember that several guests were recording that evening? Well, some of those videos have gone viral. People are not witnessing a senile old woman attacking an innocent couple. They are observing a dignified woman revealing the truth about years of abuse and manipulation. Amelia leaned in to examine the phone as well. Aurora, the comments on these videos are overwhelmingly in your favor. People are commending your courage, your composure under duress, your decision to establish boundaries. Some are sharing their own experiences of familial mistreatment. You have become a symbol of defiance against the exploitation of seniors. Carlos nodded approvingly. This public reception will prove invaluable should the case proceed to court. It is challenging to assert that someone lacks mental competency when thousands are applauding the logic and justice of their actions. His practiced smile reappeared, hinting that perhaps the legal confrontation wouldn't be as one-sided as I had initially apprehended. However, there's something more you ought to be aware of, I stated, making a resolution I had been contemplating for the preceding 3 days. If Ethan and Juliet are intent on engaging in this dispute, if they wish to transform it into a public legal entanglement, then they will soon come to understand precisely with whom they are trifling. I rose and proceeded to my desk, where I had been compiling my own collection of pertinent documents. For these past 3 days, I had been in communication with numerous legal professionals specializing in cases of elder mistreatment. I had meticulously documented every instance, the unnerving visits, the veiled threats, the deliberate scheme to divest me of my possessions, even the physical assault when Juliet struck me. I retrieved photographs of my bruised cheek, taken immediately following the wedding ceremony, serving as medical corroboration of the physical battery. If they desire conflict, I continued, a resolve I hadn't experienced in decades coursing through me, they shall have conflict, but it will be a conflict waged on my own terms, utilizing my own resources and with the unvarnished truth as my ally. Furthermore, I added with a smile that surprised even myself, I have made a decision to undertake an action I should have embraced years ago. I intend to share my complete narrative with the public. I shall demonstrate to the world precisely what transpires when avarice masquerades as familial affection. The atmosphere in the room shifted, imbued with a new vitality. It was the energy of individuals who were confident that justice was on their side and that they possessed the means to ensure its triumph. 6 months after that pivotal night that irrevocably divided my life into a before and an after, I found myself seated in the most prestigious television studio in the city, awaiting the commencement of the interview that would broadcast my entire story across the nation. The program, aptly titled Stories of a Lifetime, had reached out to Carlos subsequent to the wedding videos, amassing over 2 million views on social media platforms. My experience had transformed into a national emblem of resilience against the exploitation of elders by their own families. The journalist, Catherine Diaz, a woman held in high regard for her professional probity, reviewed her notes while the technical crew finalized the lighting arrangements. Mrs. Hughes, she addressed me, her smile conveying genuine warmth. I want you to understand that your fortitude has inspired countless individuals. We have received hundreds of correspondence from viewers who have navigated analogous prediculations over these past 6 months. Many circumstances had indeed altered. The legal proceedings that Ethan and Juliet had attempted to instigate against me disintegrated spectacularly when Carlos presented irrefutable evidence of their conspiracy to have me declared legally incapacitated. Not only did they falter in their legal bid, but they were also penalized for pursuing frivolous litigation and ordered to cover my legal expenses, a sum amounting to $45,000. The subsequent financial ruin was swift and catastrophic. Ethan found himself discharged from his employment once his employer became aware of the public scandal. Juliet attempted to launch an image consultancy venture, but the viral dissemination of the videos had irrevocably tarnished her professional standing. They were now residing in a modest one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, engaged in part-time employment and struggling to meet their accumulated financial obligations. "We will be broadcasting in 5 minutes," the program director announced. I directed my gaze towards the cameras that would soon transmit my personal saga into millions of households, experiencing a blend of apprehension and steadfast resolve. By my side stood Carlos, who had graciously agreed to participate to elucidate the legal intricacies of the case. In the audience were Joseph, Lucy, and Amelia, my unwavering sources of support throughout these arduous months. The most agonizing aspect of these past 6 months had been Ethan's absolute silence. Following the defeat in the legal arena, he had made no effort to re-establish contact. There were no calls seeking absolution, no letters attempting to rationalize his conduct, no admission that his actions had been erroneous. It was as if he had concluded that harboring animosity towards me was simpler than confronting the reality of his transgressions. Juliet, conversely, had attempted to communicate on multiple occasions. Her messages had evolved from legal ultimatums to desperate appeals for financial assistance. The most recent communication, received a mere 2 weeks prior, read, "Aurora, I acknowledge we faltered, but we are family. Ethan is unwell from stress, and I am expecting. Please, you cannot permit your grandchild to endure poverty." The news of the pregnancy struck me like a physical blow. I was on the precipice of becoming a grandmother, yet my grandchild would grow up in an environment steeped in resentment towards me. Nevertheless, I had internalized the most challenging lesson of my existence. I could not extricate individuals who were unwilling to extricate themselves. My attempts to do so merely perpetuated their self-destructive tendencies. "Mrs. Hughes, we commence in 30 seconds, Catherine informed me. I drew a deep breath and reflected on all those who had reached out to me after viewing the videos, sharing their own narratives of familial maltreatment, seniors whose offspring had seized control of their financial assets, parents subjected to emotional blackmail by their irresponsible adult children, grandparents threatened with the denial of access to their grandchildren unless they provided financial backing. We are live in 3, 2, 1. The crimson indicator on the camera illuminated, and Catherine initiated with an impeccably rehearsed introduction. "Good evening and welcome to Stories of a Lifetime. I am Catherine Diaz, and tonight we are honored to have with us Aurora Hughes, a 68-year-old woman whose story has sent shockwaves across the nation and brought the issue of elder abuse to the forefront of a national discourse. Mrs. Hughes," Catherine continued, turning her attention to me. "6 months have passed since the events at your son's wedding. How does it feel to know that your narrative has inspired so many people?" Her inquiry was direct yet compassionate, affording me the opportunity to begin on my own terms. "I feel a profound sense of gratitude," I responded, sensing the stabilization of my voice as I spoke. Gratitude that something as agonizing as the estrangement from my son has served to assist others in comparable circumstances. For months, I felt utterly isolated and bewildered, questioning whether I was the one at fault. Now I understand that my ordeal is more prevalent than any of us would care to admit. Catherine nodded and consulted her notes. Please tell us about the years leading up to that fateful night, when you began to suspect that something was amiss in your relationship with your son and his fiancée. This was precisely the question I had been anticipating, the opportunity to articulate how emotional and financial abuse unfolds gradually, almost imperceptibly. It commenced with minor transgressions, I explained, recalling those initial indicators I had overlooked out of affection, remarks pertaining to my age, suggestions that I was no longer capable of self-sufficiency, subtle pressures to make choices that primarily benefited them. Familial mistreatment rarely begins with physical altercations or vociferous arguments. It commences with the insidious erosion of one's self-assurance, with the deliberate act of making you question your own perception of reality. Carlos leaned forward to provide legal context. What Aurora describes aligns perfectly with the typical patterns observed in elder abuse cases. The perpetrators, particularly when they are family members, employ psychological manipulation tactics before escalating to more overt forms of coercion. It is insidious because it is disguised as affectionate concern. And the moment of revelation, Catherine inquired, when did you resolve to expose the truth about your financial standing? This was the question I had anticipated, the one demanding an explanation of the most arduous decision of my life. It was the slap, I stated plainly, when Juliet struck me in the midst of the ballroom, witnessed by 130 individuals, for my refusal to relinquish the keys to my apartment. At that instant, I understood that she had crossed an irrevocable boundary. In that moment, I realized it was no longer about shielding my family from the repercussions of their actions. It was about safeguarding myself from continued victimization. The interview extended for 45 minutes, encompassing every facet of my ordeal. I recounted the decision to lead a modest existence to safeguard my privacy, the years of covert financial backing I had provided, the conspiracy to have me declared legally incompetent, and the ensuing legal confrontation. Each response was meticulously crafted, not only to narrate my story, but also to educate others on the discernible warning signs and the available resources. Mrs. Hughes, Catherine remarked towards the conclusion of the program, do you have a message for your son should he be viewing this interview tonight? This was the most challenging question, the one I had simultaneously dreaded and longed for. I fixed my gaze directly at the camera, aware of the possibility that Ethan might be watching. Ethan, if you are listening to this, I want you to know that I still love you. I will always love you, for you are my son. However, loving someone does not equate to condoning their mistreatment. Loving someone does not mean sacrificing one's dignity for their convenience. Loving someone does not mean becoming a pawn in their avarice. The doors to my heart will perpetually remain open to you, I continued, feeling the onset of tears welling in my eyes, but only if you can enter them as the honourable man I endeavoured to raise you to be. Only if you can meet my gaze and assume complete accountability for your conduct. Only if you can demonstrate that you have comprehended that familial bonds are forged on love and mutual respect, not on opportunism and exploitation. And for all those observing who recognize their own experiences within mine, I added, addressing the wider viewership, I wish for you to know that you possess the inherent right to be treated with dignity, irrespective of your age. You have the right to make autonomous decisions concerning your finances, your domicile, and your life. You have the right to establish boundaries with family members who treat you disparagingly, and you have the right to seek assistance when those boundaries are transgressed. As the cameras ceased recording, the studio erupted in a wave of applause from the production staff. Catherine embraced me, her eyes glistening with tears. Aurora, that was among the most profoundly impactful interviews I have ever conducted. It will undoubtedly alter lives. Carlos nodded with evident pride, recognizing that we had achieved something of far greater significance than merely prevailing in a legal dispute. That evening, as I was driven back to my apartment with Joseph, Lucy, and Amelia, I experienced a profound sense of tranquility, more so than I had felt in years. I had articulated my story, I had defended my truth, and I had leveraged my suffering to aid others. Regardless of what the future held concerning Ethan, I knew I had acted with integrity. "Aurora," Lucy remarked from the rear seat, "I am immensely proud of you. You have transformed the most harrowing experience of your life into a source of protection for countless individuals." Her words resonated deeply within my heart as we arrived at my residence. The apartment that Juliet had once coveted now genuinely felt like a home once more. Not because I had triumphed in a legal battle, but because I had ultimately learned to value myself sufficiently to demand the respect I merited. I had come to understand that sometimes the sole method to salvage a relationship is to be prepared to relinquish it. And as I prepared for bed that night, I recognized that I had set the most crucial example of my existence, that it is never too late to assert oneself, that one is never too old to demand dignity, and that genuine affection sometimes necessitates the most difficult decisions. My narrative had reached its conclusion, yet my life was merely embarking on a new chapter. 2 years have elapsed since that fateful night which bifurcated my existence into a distinct before and after. As I commit these words to paper, I am seated on the very balcony where I once tended to my plants and contemplated the silent indignities I believed I had to endure out of maternal devotion. How drastically the world transforms when one finally discovers the fortitude to assign a value to their inherent dignity. The dawn broke like all the others for the past 18 months, commencing with a telephone call from Carmen, the coordinator of the Aurora Hughes Foundation for the Protection of Seniors. Yes, I had elected to lend my name to the philanthropic organization I established with a portion of my redirected inheritance. "Aurora, we have 23 new cases this week," Carmen informed me, her voice imbued with that characteristic blend of sorrow and determination shared by those of us engaged in this vital field. All exhibiting similar patterns: adult children exerting pressure on elderly parents for property or monetary assets. Every case that crosses my desk feels like peering into a reflection of my past. Yesterday, I reviewed the file of a 72-year-old woman whose daughter persuaded her to liquidate her home for her supposed benefit, only to discover that the funds had been utilized to underwrite a failed business venture and a sojourn in Europe. The day before yesterday, it involved a 69-year-old gentleman subjected to emotional blackmail by his twins. "If you do not loan us $50,000, they threatened, "you will never see your grandchildren again." The irony of the situation is not lost on me. I have transmuted my most profound personal adversity into my most meaningful life purpose. The foundation has assisted over 400 seniors in regaining dominion over their financial affairs, their properties, and most importantly, their self-worth. We have assembled a team of specialized legal professionals, social workers, and psychologists, along with a support network that I so desperately wished had been available to me during those periods of profound isolation and confusion. Joseph remains my most cherished neighbor, though he now also serves as the vice president of my foundation. His 72 years are infused with a revitalized vigor since he began delivering lectures on identifying familial manipulation. "Aurora," he confided to me last week as we were reviewing case files, "I never envisioned my twilight years would involve me acting as a detective for dysfunctional families, but it is quite possibly the most exhilarating adventure I have ever embarked upon." Lucy relocated into the apartment adjacent to mine a year ago. Following her divorce from a union that had endured a mere 8 months, she concluded that proximity to the most courageous individual she knows was essential. Her role as the Foundation's educational director has afforded her a sense of purpose that she never discovered in her career as a conventional educator. Aunt Aurora, she frequently tells me, you imparted to me the understanding that genuine family is not always defined by blood, but rather by those who choose to honor you unconditionally. The widespread acclaim of my public narrative has precipitated unforeseen repercussions. The literary work I penned, with the assistance of an investigative journalist, achieved national bestseller status. Titled When Love Hurts, An Elderly Woman Fights Back, it has sold in excess of 200,000 copies, with all royalties directly benefiting the Foundation. The letters I receive from readers serve as tangible evidence that my experience has resonated within countless households where silence had become the prevailing norm. Carlos continues to be my financial advisor, and he now also serves as the Foundation's chief accountant. His expertise in navigating the legal complexities of my confrontation with Ethan has proven to be an invaluable asset in assisting others facing similar predicaments. Mrs. Hughes, he informed me during our monthly consultation, we have successfully recovered over $3 million in properties and savings that were illicitly seized by abusive family members. The question that invariably arises, the one posed in every interview and every profound conversation, is whether I harbor any longing for Ethan. The answer is multifaceted and tinged with sorrow. I yearn for the child he once was, the young man who occasionally displayed glimpses of kindness and integrity. I mourn the idealized vision of the family I once believed existed, but I do not lament the recent years characterized by manipulation, emotional coercion, and systematic disrespect. Ethan has attempted to contact me precisely 3 times over the course of these past 2 years. The initial instance occurred 6 months after the television interview, seemingly prompted by some colleagues who had viewed the program and subsequently altered their interactions with him. The second occurred upon the birth of his son, my grandson Oliver, 14 months ago. The third instance transpired 3 months ago when Juliet departed, taking the infant and half of their meagre possessions with her. Each of his calls has been a request for financial assistance, never an offer of genuine contrition or an acknowledgement of the harm he has inflicted. His cognitive framework remains unaltered. He perceives his difficulties as external injustices rather than as direct consequences of his own choices. Our most recent exchange lasted less than 5 minutes and concluded when he stated, "Mom, your pride outweighs your grandson's well-being." I responded with a clarity that surprised even myself. "Ethan, my dignity is precisely as significant as my grandson's, and I trust that one day you will internalize that lesson more profoundly than you have." This marked the first occasion I had ever terminated a telephone conversation with my son. It was, paradoxically, a liberating experience. The subject of Oliver, my grandson, is the sole topic that can still elicit tears from me. He is 14 months old and does not know me. When Juliet departed, she took with her all the family photographs, including the few I possessed of him. I have established a trust fund for his university education, administered by Carlos, which will become accessible to him upon his 18th birthday, irrespective of the nature of our relationship at that time. Perhaps, Amelia suggests during our weekly suppers, when Oliver reaches an age of maturity, he will embark on his own quest to uncover the truths of his family's history. Perhaps he will find the courage to seek out his grandmother on his own volition. Amelia has become my closest confidant, particularly since she herself was compelled to establish stringent boundaries with toxic family members a decade ago. What astounds me most about these past 2 years is the remarkable improvement in my physical and mental well-being. During the final years spent with Ethan and Juliet, I had developed chronic insomnia, persistent headaches, and a pervasive anxiety that maintained me in a state of constant vigilance. My physician indicates that my current medical assessments reveal stress levels consistent with a woman 10 years my junior. Aurora, Dr. Hernandez remarked during my most recent checkup, it is truly remarkable how the body responds when we eradicate sources of toxic stress. Your blood pressure is impeccable, your sleep is restorative, even your posture has improved. He is indeed correct. I carry myself with greater uprightness. My voice possesses a firmer cadence, and my hands no longer tremble when I am required to make significant determinations. The floral establishment where I was employed ceased operations a year ago, but I have discovered a new avocation in the community garden I helped establish within the building. I now instruct other senior residents on the cultivation of medicinal plants and organic horticultural techniques. It is an endeavor that fosters a connection with the earth and with individuals who appreciate accumulated wisdom rather than perceiving it as obsolescence. My current daily regimen encompasses 3 days per week at the Foundation's offices, 2 days dedicated to visiting the residences of seniors requiring emotional support, and weekends devoted to the composition of my second book. This forthcoming publication will focus on practical methodologies for identifying and averting familial financial exploitation, drawing upon the cases we have addressed. The apartment, once a focal point of avarice, now represents a sanctuary of tranquility and creativity. I have repurposed Ethan's former bedroom into an office space where I receive individuals seeking guidance. The walls are adorned with expressions of gratitude, photographs of families we have assisted in achieving healthy reconciliation, and diplomas from the universities where I have delivered lectures. One of the most fulfilling experiences during this period has been mentoring other elderly women who are confronting comparable circumstances. Margaret, age 74, approached the Foundation 6 months ago after her son surreptitiously sold her automobile to settle his gambling debts. We collaborated for a period of 3 months, and last week she transmitted a photograph of herself, beaming beside her newly acquired vehicle, which she purchased with her own savings after successfully reclaiming the funds through legal means. Aurora, Margaret conveyed in her correspondence, you taught me that establishing boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but rather a matter of survival. You impressed upon me that self-love is not synonymous with selfishness, but rather a fundamental necessity. You impressed upon me that it is never too late to assert oneself. Her words served as a potent reminder of why all of this hardship was ultimately worthwhile. Reflecting upon these past 2 years, I have come to the realization that my narrative does not culminate in the conventional happily ever after scenario, where the entire family reunites and lives in perpetual bliss. However, it offers something superior: authenticity, reclaimed dignity, and a purpose that transcends my personal suffering. I have learned that sometimes the most profound demonstration of self-love involves disengaging from those who persistently inflict harm. If I possessed the capacity to transmit a message to my past self, to the Aurora who entered that wedding ballroom 2 years ago, I would impart this counsel: be courageous. What is about to transpire will be agonizing, but on the other side awaits a life more genuine than you could ever have envisioned. Peace awaits you, the peace that stems from the unwavering certainty that you will never again permit anyone to treat you as though you are expendable. Tonight, as I conclude the writing of these reflections, I look towards the future with a renewed sense of optimism. The following day, I'm scheduled to convene with esteemed members of the Senate to deliberate on proposed statutes aimed at enhancing the safeguarding of our elder population against familial maltreatment. The subsequent week will witness the ceremonial opening of the Foundation's third divisional hub. In the month that follows, I intend to embark on the creation of a serialized documentary exploring this very subject, which will be disseminated across the entire nation. My existence at 70 years of age is more abundant, holds greater purpose, and is truer than it was at 68. I have come to understand that the cessation of a destructive connection is not an absence, but rather an emancipation. I have realized that genuine kinship is as much a matter of selection as it is of lineage, and I have demonstrated that it is perpetually possible to commence a fresh phase in one's personal narrative. When individuals inquire whether I harbor any remorse for my actions on that particular evening, my response remains constant. Did the narrative resonate with you? And from which urban center are you tuning in? Let us engage in discussion within the comments section. Should you find the story appealing, your generosity in sending a super thanks would empower me to continue presenting similar accounts. I am profoundly appreciative of your kind encouragement. I eagerly anticipate your reflections on the story. Displayed before you are two fresh life narratives that I wholeheartedly endorse. My channel offers a wealth of additional content. Kindly consider subscribing. I bid you farewell until our next life story, with affection and esteem.